After seeing a lot of Nancy Pelosi this past week, I cannot really put into words the vast gap in stature between the person who was the Speaker of the House, technically is for the last few weeks, and the guy who wants to become one. He is a unserious, unaccomplished lightweight. And no matter what your politics are, I think there are good reasons why people in the House do not want him as Speaker. Now, some of these people are simply so far gone that they want to be able to extract all kinds of wacky things from him and be able to yank him at any point. But those moderates should be concerned as well. This is the guy they're going to follow into battle. This is the guy who's going to be responsible ultimately for dealing with things like the debt ceiling. He does not inspire confidence, and he never has. So I think what McConnell is signaling is he trusts Nancy Pelosi to get an omnibus bill done. He does not trust Kevin McCarthy. And that's quite a statement on McCarthy's abilities. So I think for a long time, we used to say that the bills in the House went to go die in the Senate. I think a lot's going to die in the House, hopefully not things like the debt ceiling measure. But I think this does not speak well of Kevin McCarthy's legislative abilities, about the trust factor, and about, frankly, his relationship with the Senate minority leader, Mitch McConnell. So I think the Republicans are in for a really rough ride.
Eugene, let's talk about some of the, as to use Jennifer's term, the wacky things that some of these Republicans are trying to extract. You have a group of 7 hardline Republicans that includes House quote-unquote Freedom Caucus Chair Scott Perry, and their list of demands, some of them include restoring any member's ability to make a motion to vacate the chair and force a vote on removing the speaker, increasing the number of Freedom Caucus members in committee chairmanships and on the House Rules Committee. I mean, we often talk about sort of the chaos that they are trying to incept into the process, but what happens if their demands are met?
Yeah, I mean, if you remember when he wanted to be an almost was speaker years ago, Kevin McCarthy backed out because of a lot of these similar asks that were coming from the right wing of the Republican Party, right? He said, I can't do that. That's one of the ways that Paul Ryan became speaker. But I mean, it would be chaos. A motion to vacate would mean at any point anybody would be able to say he has to go. And that is something that he doesn't want to do, obviously. That gives up a lot of his power. And that also means he is at the whim of he's not in charge. He's at the whim of the folks in his caucus. And that is not something that you want to do as Speaker of the House. Jen was just talking about Nancy Pelosi. We've talked a lot about whether or not, Dems are in disarray, what happened. But over and over and over again, Nancy Pelosi especially has been able to keep a caucus together of people from all over the political spectrum on the left. And that is something that McCarthy seems unable to do, right? He is not able to get their votes. He seems unable to even convince them that the things that they want are not going to make it easier for them to govern. I think as you're running into 2024, something that is on his mind, on the minds of other Republicans, is that if we do give these things, do we look like an unserious party as we head into 2024? And how does that affect the standing with the voters, maybe independent voters, and certainly even moderate Republicans across the country, and especially in those swing districts? How do we look to them? Do we look like a party that's ready to govern? And at this point, it seems like that Republicans in the House do not seem ready to govern as a group.